The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece, and the silence of the house was like a constant drone. A soundtrack to my life. It was all that I could hear. I let out a long, slow sigh, my breath clouding in the cool evening air as I gazed out at the familiar landscape of my parents' backyard. But what was familiar was also starting to feel so foreign. It had been years since my parents had split, and their separation had carved out a hollow space in my life, an emptiness that seemed to grow with each passing day. I still remember that night, the shouting from downstairs, the slamming doors, and then that heavy, terrifying thought followed. Mom had caught Dad with someone else. I remember that. I knew that our life was never going to be the same after that. The divorce had come fast, like a storm that had ripped through our lives, and Mom had moved out shortly after, leaving me in a house that felt emptier with every passing day. Dad didn't stick around long either. His work kept him traveling, and even when he was home, he was hardly present. He was like a ghost. He was just a shadow, a void. He was there, and he wasn't, all at the same time. And that, as always, left me alone with Emily, my stepmother, who, by all accounts, should have left my dad years ago, but she didn't. And to be honest, I had no idea why. Emily was different. At 63, she possessed an elegance about her, a grace, a sophistication that women half her age could only dream of. She was beautiful, not in a loud or obvious way, but in a quiet and timeless manner. She possessed an understated beauty that always caught my attention, her eyes, piercing yet gentle, full of depth, like she had seen and felt too much of this life. She carried herself with this quiet confidence that had the ability to pull people in, to make them want to be near her, to understand her. And it had also pulled me in ever since the day that I had first met her. I did not know exactly when my feelings for her had started to change, to transform into something more, something that I knew I should not feel. Might be it was during those long summer evenings that we spent together after Dad had left for another work trip, and it was just us. We were in the same house, living parallel lives, but slowly. Those lines started to blur. We slowly started to drift into each other's space, our lives starting to intertwine. Dinner, and I joined her in the kitchen, helping her chop the vegetables or set the table, as we talked about everything and nothing. She'd sit out on the porch, reading a book, and I'd follow, settling down beside her, our conversations flowing as easily as the warm summer breeze, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow on the landscape. I could see her. I could really see her, and it was then that I knew that she was more than just my stepmother. She was something else. This summer, though, something shifted. Everything felt different. Everything felt intense. I couldn't stop noticing the way that she smiled at me, the way that her laughter made my chest tighten, the way her eyes, full of warmth and understanding, could hold my gaze for longer than they should. And then there was just the way she looked, how stunning she still was. Even in her 60s, her body so curvy, so voluptuous, so perfect in ways that I could not ignore. Even when she was just doing the simplest of things. It wasn't just that she was attractive, she was magnetic. Her presence was like a force, pulling me towards her, and the more time I spent around her, the more I found myself thinking about her in ways that I knew I shouldn't, in ways that made my blood run hot and my heart skip a beat. I had to force myself to look away, to think about something else, but my mind always drifted back to her. I was losing myself in her. One evening, we were sitting together in the living room. The heat of the day finally lifted, and the windows were open, letting in the warm summer breeze and the soft sound of the crickets chirping outside. She was sitting on the couch, a book in her hands, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, making her look both intellectual and vulnerable. A combination that made my heart skip a beat. I sat across from her, pretending to be interested in whatever was on TV, but all I could think about was her and the desires that were starting to consume me. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice soft, her eyes still on the page, but I could tell that she knew what was happening to me, that she could sense what I was feeling. Her voice had that softness to it, like she knew I was carrying something heavy inside of me, but did not want to push me. She was always so gentle, so understanding, so kind. I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't wrong. I had been quiet and distant. I had been avoiding her gaze, trying to keep myself as far away from her as I could. I didn't know how to talk to her about what I was feeling, or about what was going on inside of me. How could I? She was my stepmother. She had been in my life for as long as I could remember. These weren't thoughts that I was supposed to have. These feelings were wrong. I had to stop them, but the more I tried to control them, the more intense they became. "I guess I've just had a lot on my mind," I said, avoiding her gaze, looking at the television, at the meaningless show that I had been pretending to watch. She finally looked up, her eyes locking onto mine, her gaze sending shivers down my spine as she said, "Anything you want to talk about?" Her eyes were searching, trying to find the answers, looking deep within me, trying to see the secrets that I was trying to hide. I shook my head. "No," I managed to say, my voice trembling, my hands feeling clammy, my heart starting to hammer in my chest. There was nothing that I could say, not out loud, at least, but she kept looking at me, her gaze never wavering. And suddenly, the room felt smaller, the air heavier, like we were being pulled together, as if some invisible force was pushing us towards each other. I shifted in my seat, trying to shake the tension that was building between us, that was threatening to swallow us whole. But it was no use. It was like we were both waiting for something to happen, and I was waiting for something to happen. And I was terrified, and also, I wanted it. I tried to look anywhere else, but my eyes were always pulled back to her. I tried to focus on something, anything, but all I could see was her. She was all that was on my mind. I could not help but notice the curve of her body, her form always accentuated by the way she was sitting, the way her blouse was so tight as to show off her voluptuous curves. I so wanted to touch her, to caress her, to feel her skin against mine. I wanted to lose myself in her. "You know, you can talk to me, right?" she said, her voice gentler now, almost a whisper. And she looked at me and smiled, a small knowing smile that made my heart race. That made me want to say everything, to confess all of my feelings, and to finally embrace the madness that had consumed me. It was the kind of smile that made me wonder if she already knew, if she had been waiting for me to finally break, to finally give in to the desires that had been building between us for so long. I nodded, but the words wouldn't come. I could not say it. I just could not do it. Instead, I stood up, mumbling something about needing some air, before heading outside, rushing out to escape the intensity of her gaze, to find a moment of peace, a moment of sanity, a moment where I could just be myself, and not just a collection of confusing feelings. I needed to find some control before I lost it completely. As I stepped into the yard, the cool breeze hit my skin, but it did little to calm me down. It felt more like a tease. I leaned against the porch railing, staring out at the stars, my mind racing, torn between what I knew was right and this overwhelming pull that I felt towards her, this burning desire that consumed my heart, that clouded my mind, and made me feel like I was on the very edge of losing myself. I was confused. I was lost. I did not know what to do. I was confused by how I could feel so drawn to someone I wasn't supposed to be, to someone who had been brought into my life by my father, to someone who should be off limits, but as much as I tried to ignore it, I couldn't stop thinking about her. She was everything that I wanted. She made me feel something, a longing that was so intense, a desire that was so powerful that I could no longer deny it, that I could no longer control it. She made me feel alive. She made me feel like a man, and I wanted it all. I wanted her, and I wanted to take her. I wanted her to hold her tight, and I wanted her to hold me back. But she was my stepmother. She was married to my father, and no matter how charming or how beautiful she was, I could not let myself go there. One day, I was sitting in the backyard, staring out at the lake, feeling the sun against my skin, the golden rays reflecting on the water. But all I could think about was how messed up everything had become. Claire had left about an hour ago. It wasn't our first fight, but it felt like it might be our last. We always fought. Everything was a fight. She was 19, still so young, still so impulsive, still so reckless, and still trying to figure herself out. And I wasn't exactly sure where I stood either, but I knew enough to realize that we were on different wavelengths, completely different paths, and that we were slowly drifting apart. She wanted excitement, spontaneity, things that just didn't seem to matter to me anymore. She wanted to be wild, but I just wanted to feel, to connect. I don't get you, Jake, she had said, her voice full of frustration, her eyes wide with anger. 1 minute, you're all over me, and the next it's like I don't even exist, like I'm nothing to you. I didn't know how to explain it to her. I wanted to care. I wanted to care, to love her in the way that she wanted me to, but everything felt wrong. There was no depth between us. It was all surface level, and every time I tried to connect with her emotionally, she would brush it off, eager to move on to the next thrill, to the next adventure, to the next thing that she wanted to do. It wasn't her fault, I reminded myself. She was just young, but that was the problem, wasn't it? She was inexperienced emotionally and physically, and it was starting to show. She was too immature, too reckless, too unstable. And it was becoming more and more difficult to feel anything meaningful, to feel anything real. She didn't understand what I needed. And truth be told, I didn't even know how to tell her, because how could I even tell myself? How could I even put into words what I truly needed? I was just trying to grasp onto anything that I could find, to distract myself from the thoughts of Emily. I was upset with myself too. I had been distant more than I wanted to admit, and I knew why. It wasn't fair to her, not when my mind kept drifting back to Emily, my stepmother, the woman that I wanted, the woman that I craved, the woman that I could not have. Sitting there, I couldn't stop the memories from flooding in, of the way Emily made me feel, how she seemed to understand things without me having to say a word, how she made me feel seen, how she made me feel understood. There was something about her calmness, her maturity, her ability to be present without needing constant attention or validation. She had a way of making everything feel grounded, and that was what I craved. That was what I needed. Claire didn't give me that. Claire was all energy and unpredictability. She was a whirlwind that never stopped, a force of nature that I was trying and failing to contain. I had thought her wildness would be exciting, but now I just felt exhausted and guilty. Guilty because every time we fought, I realized more and more that it wasn't Claire that I wanted to be with. It was Emily. All that time, I was seeking comfort in the chaos that was Claire. But my soul was searching for the quiet intensity that was Emily. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes as the breeze picked up, and I could almost feel her presence beside me, as if she was watching over me, protecting me. She was inside, probably reading or fixing something in the kitchen, always busy, always productive. Dad was away again, traveling for work like he always did, always chasing after money and power, and leaving May alone with her. And the more time I spent with her, the harder it became to ignore what was happening to me. I had a girlfriend. I should have been focused on that, but here I was, thinking about my 63-year-old stepmother instead. a woman who should have been completely off limits. And the more I tried to push her away, the stronger she became. Emily wasn't like Claire. She wasn't impulsive or reckless. She had lived a life. She had seen things. She had done things that I couldn't begin to imagine. That experience, that wisdom, it drew me in. With her, I didn't feel like I had to pretend. I didn't have to perform or impress. She made me feel understood in a way that Claire never could. And it wasn't just about understanding. It was more than that. I was attracted to her too. I was drawn to her, and that scared me. Because how could I feel like this? I couldn't explain it, even to myself. She was my dad's wife. The thought alone should have made me feel sick, but it didn't. It left me wanting more. I wanted to get closer to her. I wanted to feel that same intensity, that same recognition between us that I sensed every time she looked at me. I wanted to explore the boundaries that we had both been trying so hard to ignore. It was then that I knew, in that very moment, that I was in trouble. The storm started that day, out of us, nowhere. The sky opening up and pouring down rain in sheets. The sound was heavy. It was intense. It was almost deafening. I stood by the window, watching it hammer against the glass, the sound rhythmic and oddly calming, a strange mixture of peace and intensity, like the emotions that were raging inside of me. I had been drawn to Emily's chaos, her power, her ability to command any room, and I craved that chaos, that power, and that control. Dad had left earlier that day, off on another business trip, leaving me alone in the house, or so I thought. The front door swung open, and I heard the rush of footsteps before I saw her. Emily stepped into the hallway, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, droplets of water sliding down her neck, her clothes clinging to her like a second skin, revealing every curve of her body. She cursed under her breath, shaking off her raincoat, her face flushed from the wind and the rain, and I watched her from the corner of the living room, my breath catching in my throat. I hadn't even realized that she'd gone out, but now she was back, drenched from head to toe, her clothes clinging to her in ways I couldn't ignore. She was all tight curves, and I could see everything through her damp blouse, my eyes unable to focus on anything else. "Caught in the storm," she said, offering me a sheepish smile, her lips a perfect shade of pink, and her eyes so knowing, so captivating. Wasn't expecting it to rain this hard. She reached up and pushed the wet strands of hair out of her face, making my heart jump in my chest. I nodded, unable to find my voice for a moment, my eyes following her every move as she kicked off her shoes and walked into the kitchen, her wet clothes sticking to her skin like it was a map of my desire. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible. The way her shirt clung to her body, the curves of her figure outlined against the damp fabric, I was losing myself as her curves seemed to take on a life of their own, calling to me, teasing me, drawing me in. She was so powerful. She was like a force of nature, and I was powerless against her. I was nothing but a helpless bystander, and I was enjoying every single minute of it. It was too much. "You must be starving," she called out, breaking my train of thought, bringing me back to the present, her voice a melody, a beautiful song that only I could hear. "How about I make us something to eat? I'll throw these clothes in the dryer first," she added, her voice casual, as if nothing was wrong, as if everything was normal. I muttered something like, "Yeah, sure," though I wasn't entirely sure what I had agreed to. My heart was racing, my body was on fire, and I felt the heat creeping up my neck, making me want to touch her, to feel her skin against mine. She disappeared upstairs to change, leaving me alone, and I let out a breath that I didn't realize I'd been holding. My body trembling, my thoughts a complete and utter mess. I sat down at the dining table, trying to shake the image of her out of my mind, but it lingered, her figure so vivid, so real, her image burned into my brain. It wasn't the first time I had noticed her like that, but tonight, something felt different. Might be it was the rain, or might be it was the fact that we were alone. But the tension I'd been feeling for weeks now seemed to finally settle between us. Like a thick, heavy fog, a tangible force that was changing the atmosphere around me. I was going to be consumed, I was going to be destroyed, and I wanted to let it all happen. A few minutes later, she came back down, dressed in a dry pair of leggings and a loose shirt. It should have made things easier, but it didn't. It was far from making things easier. She still looked incredible. Her damp hair now pulled into a loose bun, her skin still glowing from the rain, and she was now all soft curves and gentle smiles. She moved around the kitchen with such grace, pulling ingredients out of the fridge and setting them on the counter with an effortless ease that I both admired and also craved. I was like a kid in a candy store, wanting to touch everything, taste everything, and have it all. For myself, and only myself. I watched her every move, the way her hips swayed as she moved from the stove to the sink, the soft hum of a song that I didn't recognize, escaping her lips, trying, yet she had my full attention. She had my complete and utter devotion. "Pasta, okay?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder at me, her eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. And that contact sent a shiver down my spine. "Yeah, that's fine," I managed to say, my voice a little too tight, a little too breathy. My body still on fire, my body still on fire. Mine still in a whirl. I was lost. I shifted in my chair, trying to focus on anything but her. But the more I tried not to look, the harder it became to tear my eyes away. She was just so different from anyone that I'd ever been with, so composed, so sure of herself, even in the simplest of tasks, like cooking dinner. She exuded this effortless grace that I both admired and desired, and I knew that at that moment that she had become my everything. She made me feel like I was swing, both in control and completely out of control, and I was loving every single second of it. She set the plates on the table and sat across from me, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the room, a familiar scent that always made me feel comfortable, made me feel safe. But now, it was also becoming a trigger, a memory, a reminder of my desire for her. I could barely taste the food. My mind was too wrapped up in her, in how close she was, in how easy it would be to reach out and touch her hand, to cross the boundaries that we had both been trying so hard to maintain. We ate in silence for a while, the sound of the rain against the windows filling the space between us, creating a sense of intimacy, like we were the only two sick people in the world. I wanted to say something, to break the tension that hung in the air like a thick, heavy fog, but I did not know how. I was afraid that if I spoke, that I would lose myself completely, and that I would never be able to find my way back. I was caught in a dangerous game, and I didn't know how to play. But I didn't know how to quit. She seemed so at ease, as if nothing unusual was happening. But for me, every second that passed felt like the air was getting thicker, like I was being pulled into something that I was both longing for and also terrified of. At the same time, after dinner, she stood up to clear the plates, and I watched her, unable to stop myself, my eyes following her every movement again. The way her shirt lifted slightly as she reached for the dishes, revealing a sliver of skin just above her waistband. My desire for her was like a fire, building with each passing moment, consuming me, making it harder and harder to breathe. "Thanks for keeping me company tonight," she said softly, her voice breaking through my thoughts and making my heart skip a beat as she turned to look at me. Her eyes lingering a little longer than they should have, her gaze sending a wave of heat through my body. "Anytime," I replied, my voice barely a whisper, my gaze locked on hers, my body burning for her touch. As she walked past me to put the plates in the sink, her hand brushed against my shoulder, just a gentle touch, but it sent a jolt touch through me, like a spark shooting through every part of my body. She didn't say anything, didn't even pause, but I knew she felt it too. She had to. The rain continued to fall outside, the storm still raging, but inside, everything had changed. Everything had changed. As I sat there, the rain still hammering down outside, my mind drifted to Claire. I was using her, and I had to admit it to myself. At least, I couldn't help it. She was my girlfriend. At least I was supposed to think of her that way. But as I supposed to think of her that way, I sat in the same room with Emily, feeling all these forbidden desires. Something gnawed at me, telling me that I had been lying to myself all of this time. There was never a spark with Claire, not like this. Not like what I felt with Emily. Sure, Claire was sweet, fun even. And she was always so full of energy, eager to try new things, always pulling me into some impulsive adventure. But there was something missing between us, something that I couldn't quite name. At first, I had convinced myself that it was just a phase, that we needed more time to figure each other out, that we just needed to get to know each other better. But sitting here, feeling this overwhelming pull toward Emily, I realized it wasn't about time. It wasn't about time, about connection or the lack of it. And Claire had never been able to give that to me. I wanted to get closer to Emily. I wanted to feel that energy again, the way my heart raced when she smiled at me, the way my skin tingled when her hand brushed against mine. Even by accident, with her, I felt alive, more aware of myself than I ever did with Claire. I glanced over at Emily as she stood at the sink, her back to me, and felt a tightness in my chest, a longing that was becoming too powerful to contain. I couldn't deny it anymore. The spark I had been searching for, the one I never found with Claire, was right here, in this house, in this moment, and it wasn't going away. I wanted her, and I wanted to cross that line that I had been trying so hard to contain for so long. I knew that it was wrong. I knew that it was forbidden, but I could no longer fight it. I had to embrace it, even if it meant that I was going to be destroyed in the process. I wanted a pack of cigarettes. I wanted a pack of cigarettes, a small, forbidden pleasure that I did not allow myself to have. I knew that they would be in my father's room, hidden in a drawer, and I needed a moment away from the intensity of Emily's presence. I went inside, and while I was searching the Emily's presence drawers, I found a set of letters bound together with a faded ribbon. The letters were from Emily to my father, the address written on them in a delicate script. I hesitated for a moment. Then curiosity won over, and I opened them. As I started reading, my heart was pounding. The words on the page a shock to my soul. They were all seductive and passionate, filled with desire and longing and need. She described to him every inch of her body, how her body ached for his touch, how even thinking about him made her feel a fire burning within her, a hunger that only he could satiate. The letters were from the time when my parents were married, from when my mother was alive, and that was empirical evidence of my father cheating on my mother. Maybe this was how she had caught him. Maybe this was the reason why she had finally left. There was a mixed feeling of anger and also arousal, a confusion that I had never felt before, a mix of betrayal and desire that I had never felt before. Consumed me from the inside out. I felt bad for my mother and also turned on at the thought of Emily and those words she had written, all of that passion, all of that desire. I imagined it all. I visualized it all, making me lose control. I could feel it there, between my legs, a physical manifestation of the turmoil that was raging within me. I had never felt such a confusing mix of emotion before. The anger, the desire, the frustration. It was all boiling inside of me as I sat there in my father's room. I could not help but think about him, about all the pain that he had caused, about all the damage that he had done. He deserved to feel that same betrayal that he had caused years ago when he cheated on my mother. And he cheated on my mother. Now, he was getting a taste of his own medicine. I could not help but think, as a wave of bitter satisfaction washed over me, I was going to turn his world upside down. I was going to give him exactly what he had given to my mother. But my thoughts kept drifting to Emily. She was always there, in the back of my mind, her beauty, her grace, consuming me in ways that I couldn't control. I was obsessed with her. I felt an overwhelming need to be closer to her, to feel that same intensity between us that I sensed every time she looked at me, every time she touched me. She was my obsession, and I could not let it go. I needed to know her. I needed to know her. I needed to possess her. Lost in those thoughts, I didn't even notice when she entered the room. When I finally saw her, she was standing in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me, her expression unreadable. She had caught me off guard, her gaze piercing, her eyes like steel, but something in her expression made me freeze. It wasn't shock or judgment. No, it was something else, something that made me feel like she knew. She understood, like she was reading my very soul. Her gaze lingered, her silence was heavy, and instead of pulling away in embarrassment, I stayed where I was. I just kept looking at her, my body filled with anticipation. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, and I could feel the tension rise, a physical force, a tangible energy that consumed all that was between us. As she walked closer to me, her hand reached for mine, and the touch sent a wave of emotion through me. A mix of desire, longing, and something that felt like recognition. It was like a silent acknowledgement, as if she knew what was going on in my mind, without me having to say a word. The connection between us, something unspoken, felt stronger in that moment than ever before. I was giving in, and I did not know how to stop myself. I reached for her, my hands trembling slightly as I touched her arm. She did not pull away. In fact, she stepped closer, and I could feel her breath on my cheek. Her body was warm, and she smelled of vanilla, my favorite scent. There was no hesitation. It felt natural, like something that we had both been avoiding, but knew was inevitable, a point that we had been moving towards since the very beginning. Her soft sigh filled the room as our hands intertwined, and I knew that we were crossing a line, that there was no going back now, and there was no going back now. I did not want to go back. It wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, a shared understanding of the complicated emotions that had been building between us for months, an intense need for intimacy, a craving for release, and an undeniable desire to lose ourselves in each other. We didn't speak, but every movement, every touch seemed to convey something that words couldn't express. And we knew that we were crossing the line, and that we were about to do something that would change everything. We were so close, closer than we had ever been, and I was overwhelmed by the mixture of desire and anger, of shame and also exhilaration coursing through me. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about feeling seen, feeling wanted, and knowing that someone understood me on a level that no one else did. She was everything that I had ever wanted, and she was about to become mine. Emily's touch was gentle, but it held a weight of experience, a knowing that made me feel both safe and completely out of control. At the same time, the boundaries between us blurred, and I realized I had wanted this for a long time, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself. I was finally ready to surrender, to let go of everything, to fall into her arms, to let her do whatever she wanted, and to let our desire take control. Then, the door slammed open. The storm outside was loud, but it couldn't drown out the fury in my father's eyes as he stood in the father's eyes doorway, a dark and imposing figure, his rage a tangible presence that filled the room. As the thunder rumbled in the distance, as if echoing the power of his wrath, the air in the room crackled with tension, thick with unspoken words and raw emotions. It felt as though time itself had stopped, as if a bomb had just gone off, but the blast was still frozen in time. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the panic that was now rising inside of me. I stared at Manuel, my father, his face a mask of fury, his eyes burning with a fire that I had never seen before. And I knew, in that very instant, that everything was about to change, that my life was never going to be the same again. The thunderstorm outside intensified, as if echoing his inner turmoil, the rain coming down even harder. As the thunder echoed throughout the house, it was almost biblical, like the heavens themselves were weeping at the horrors they were now forced to witness. Pulled her hand away from mine and stepped back, her body tense, her face a picture of shock and disbelief. She finally broke the silence. "Tom, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on his face, as she was trying to figure out what he was thinking, what he was going to do. She was usually so strong, so composed, so in control. But now she looked like a frightened child, and I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the pain that I knew was coming. My father did not respond. He just stood there, his body rigid, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes fixed on us, his breathing labored, like he was trying to control the rage that was now threatening to consume him. The silence was heavy and suffocating, and each second that passed felt like a lifetime. You were here all this time," he finally said, his voice dangerously quiet, his eyes narrowed, his face twisting in disbelief. I could feel his pain, I could feel his anger, I could feel his frustration. It was all so palpable, it was almost like a physical blow. Emily moved to speak, her hand reaching out towards him. "Tom, please, let me explain." But he recoiled, as if she had touched him with fire, his hand reaching to his own chest, his eyes full of a mixture of hurt, anger, and betrayal. "I don't want to hear it," he said, his voice rising, becoming louder and more erratic, as if he was finally losing control. "I saw everything. You two, together, in my house, with my son. How could you?" he screamed, his voice filled with a rage that was barely contained. He looked at me, his face twisted in pain, as he said, "How could you do this to me? She's your stepmother. She's my wife. Have you lost your mind? Are you trying to destroy me?" I looked down, unable to meet his gaze, feeling like a child caught in the middle of something terrible. But at the same time, I knew that I had no regret. I was never going to apologize for what I felt, what I had done, and for who I was, and for who I was. As I looked at him, I realized that he was also just a broken man, that his world had also been destroyed, just as mine had been so many years ago, and that no matter what he said, no matter what he did, he was never going to be able to fix things. He was never going to be able to forgive me or Emily. He was just broken. I was just as broken as him, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of understanding, and also a strange sense of disgust. I had finally become what I had always hated, what I had always feared. "It just happened," I muttered, my voice barely a whisper, unable to look at him, unable to face his pain. I had no explanation for my actions. I had no excuses for my feelings. My heart was screaming, my mind was racing, my body was shaking, and all that I wanted to do was to disappear. But I also felt a sense of power. I had finally confronted my fears, and I finally faced what I had wanted for so long, and there was a strange sense of peace. "It just happened. It just happened," he screamed, his face contorted with rage. "You think that this is just some game. You are my son. She is my wife. How could you disrespect me like this? How could you do this to your family? How could you destroy everything that I have worked so hard to build?" Emily, her voice trembling, her eyes red with unshed tears, tried to reason with him. "Tom, please. It's not what it seemed," she pleaded, trying to reach out to him, trying to take his hand. "Please, let me explain. You don't understand. You don't understand. Have to understand." He pushed her away, as if her touch was fire. "I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any of your lies," he yelled, his voice breaking, I trusted you both, and you betrayed me. You both betrayed me." He looked from Emily to me, his eyes full of hate, his body shaking with rage. "I can't believe you'd both do this to me. You're monsters." He started to pace around the room, throwing things at the walls, screaming obscenities, his anger consuming everything that was around him. He was like a raging beast, and we were all trapped in his cage, his actions and his rage taking over everything, making us fear for our lives. He picked up the small table by the door and threw it against the wall, sending the vase and other objects on it crashing to the floor, the sound of the glass shattering like a death knell. Emily just now stood there, her body trembling, her face pale. She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear, and I knew that it was time to act. I could not let him hurt her. He had already done so much damage. I would not let him do any more. With a sense of protectiveness, I had to stand up for Emily, to take the blame, to take the bullet for her, and save her from the storm that was now raging through the house. What? She did nothing. It was all me. I wanted her. I'm the one you should be mad at, I yelled, my voice finally finding its strength. He stopped pacing, his head snapping towards me, his eyes like burning coals. "You were the one who wanted this. You were the one who destroyed my life, who betrayed me. You," he screamed, his voice full of disbelief. I knew that if I denied it, if I tried to lie, he would see right through me, and his anger would just be amplified. I had to be honest for once, and I had to face the consequences of my actions. Stood up and faced him, my hands shaking, my heart racing, but my voice was strong and clear. "Lies, Dad. It was me. I wanted her. I've always wanted her. I've always wanted her." My voice was a mixture of confusion, hurt, anger, and betrayal as he stared at me, as if he was seeing me for the first time, as if he was finally realizing that I was not the person he always thought I was, that I was something else, something darker, something more complicated than he had ever imagined. "How could you?" he said again, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes full of pain. "How could you betray me like that? How could you have done this to me?" He then paused and muttered, "I should have known. This was all my fault. I brought her here. This was always going to happen." He looked at Emily and added, "You were always going to destroy my family, you whore." His face contorting a mix of sadness and anger. I could not let him hurt her anymore. I could not allow him to call her names. I had to step in and protect her. I stepped forward and I said, "It's not her fault either, Dad. She didn't want any of this. It was me. It has always been me. I was the one who pursued her. She never wanted anything to do with this. I was the one who took advantage of her. I was the one who destroyed everything. It was all me. I had to take the blame. I had to protect her. I had to stop him from saying anything else. I had to stop him from destroying her as well. He had destroyed me and my mother, and I was not going to let him hurt her as well." He started to laugh, a bitter, broken laugh that sent shivers down my spine, a sound that was both terrifying and tragic. "So, you both admit it then, huh? You both admit that you have destroyed my life," he said, his face contorted with pain, his voice full of rage. His words were like a knife tearing into my soul, but they were also words that I needed to hear. I had to finally accept the truth. I was a monster. I had destroyed my own family, my own life, and I had hurt the people that I had loved the most. I was nothing, and I deserved everything that was happening to me. "You're both sick. You're both monsters. You have both destroyed me," he screamed, pacing back and forth, his breathing labored, his eyes darting from Emily to me, as if he was trying to understand what had just happened. I just watched him, my heart pounding in my chest, my body trembling. But I knew that I had to stay strong, that I had to face the consequences of my actions. I was not a child anymore. I was now a man, and I had to accept the responsibility for everything that I had done. He walked to the center of the room and grabbed his chest as if he was having a heart attack, and I knew what was coming next. All of this tension, this anger, this rage was too much for him. I stood there watching as his face started to turn red and he started to clutch at his chest before collapsing to the floor, his body convulsing, his eyes wide with terror. Emily rushed to his side, trying to help him, calling out his name. But he was unresponsive. She started performing CPR, but he was not breathing. It was then that I knew what I had done. That my actions had just pushed him over the edge. I had killed my father. I was a murderer. I had destroyed my family. I was a monster, and I deserved everything that was going to come to me. I just watched as Emily desperately tried to bring him back to life, but it was no use. He was gone. My father was dead. The room was silent, except for the sound of the rain and the sound of Emily's sobs as she finally collapsed over his body, her hands still trying to find a heartbeat, her face wet with tears. She finally looked up, her eyes full of a mixture of grief and betrayal, her gaze locking on mine, and all I could see was her pain. I had destroyed everything. I had destroyed my family. I had destroyed my family. I had destroyed my family, life, and now I had destroyed her as well. I was nothing more than a force of destruction, a monster that was designed to bring chaos and pain to everything that I touched. I had brought this upon myself, and it was now time for me to pay the price. The rest of the night was a blur of police sirens, flashing lights, and hushed voices. I was taken into custody, questioned for hours, and then thrown into a cold, empty cell. I sat there, huddled in a corner, unable to sleep, unable to think, unable to feel anything but the weight of my guilt, the shame of my actions, and the pain of my loss. I had finally crossed the line. I had finally gone too far. I had destroyed everything. The cold, concrete walls of the jail cell seemed to press in on me, the silence a heavy shroud that suffocated my senses. The harsh, fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows, and I huddled in the corner, my body trembling, my mind a chaotic mix of grief, guilt, and a strange, terrifying sense of liberation. I had killed my father, the thought echoed in my head, a terrifying mantra that I could not escape. I had crossed a line that I could never uncross. The life I had known was gone, replaced by this new reality, where I was a murderer, a monster, and a criminal. I stared at my hands, now stained with my father's blood, and I felt an overwhelming sense of shame and disgust. How could I have done this? How could I have destroyed everything that was good in my life? What had become of me? I had become the very thing that I had always feared, the monster that I had been running away from. I was nothing. I was less than nothing. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, court hearings, and endless interrogations. The police asked me the same questions over and over again, their voices cold, their eyes piercing, as if they were trying to see through my soul, to find the darkness that had consumed me. They asked me about my relationship with my father, about my relationship with Emily, about the letters, about the night, about everything. They wanted answers that I did not have. They wanted justifications that I could not give. I just stared at them blankly, unable to comprehend the severity of my actions, unable to reconcile the person that I was with the monster that I had become. I had no excuses. I had nothing to say. I was a killer, and I deserved everything that was coming to me. My public defender was a young woman with kind eyes and a sympathetic smile, but her efforts to help me were met with my silence and indifference. She tried to get me to talk about my feelings. She wanted me to explain what had happened. She tried to convince me that she was on my side, that she was there to help me, but I just didn't care. I had no hope left. I had no desire to fight, to defend myself, to explain my actions. I had destroyed everything. And now it was time for me to pay the price. I had become my father's worst nightmare. I learned in bits and pieces about what had happened after my arrest. Emily was devastated. She was also being investigated as a potential accomplice, or at the very least, as a person of interest. They had taken her interest, custody, questioned her relentlessly, and they had made her face the reality of what I had done. I learned that she had been forced to relive those final moments over and over again, the police wanting to know what she was thinking, what she was feeling, what her role in all of this was. I knew that she was also being judged as the woman who had destroyed a family, as the stepmother who had seduced her stepson, as the object of my forbidden desire. She was being branded as a monster, too, and I had done that to her. I had brought her down to my level, and I hated myself for it. Claire had also found out about what had happened, and I could not help but wonder what she was thinking, what she was feeling. I hoped that she was finally able to move on, that she was able to find happiness with someone else, someone who was not broken and damaged like me. I also knew that she was probably using my story as yet another opportunity to create some drama for herself, to make herself feel more interesting, more attractive, more worthy. She always did that. She always wanted to be the center of attention. And now I had given her that, and it was all my fault. I refused to talk to them. I refused to see anyone. I did not want to face their pain, their anger, or their disgust. I had brought them all pain, and the guilt was suffocating me. I was completely alone, surrounded by my own demons, lost in the darkness of my own mind, unable to see any light, unable to find any hope as I waited for my fate to be determined. The trial was a spectacle, a macabre theater playing out in the glare of public scrutiny. My life dissected and analyzed like I was nothing more than a science experiment. The courtroom was always packed with people coming from all over to witness the unfolding of the story, to observe the monster, to watch him face the consequences of his action. But I was detached, as if I was watching a movie of my own life. I was like a ghost haunting the halls of the courthouse, unable to feel, unable to connect, my soul completely numb. The prosecution painted me as a cold-blooded killer, a monster who had been driven by lust and a twisted desire for revenge, a man who had destroyed a family and taken the life of an innocent man. They used the letters that I had found, the letters that Emily had written to my father, as evidence of her seduction, as proof of our illicit affair, and to highlight the fact that I was nothing more than a pathetic cheater. They used all the evidence that they could gather against me, and I did not offer any defense. I was guilty. They were right about me. I was nothing more than a monster, and I had no defense for that. I did not want a defense. My lawyer tried to argue that I had been driven by grief, and that I was suffering from some kind of mental instability, that I was not responsible for my actions, that I was a victim myself. But it was no use. The jury was not buying it. They were not moved by my excuses. They were not swayed by my pleas. They saw me as a killer, and they were right. That was all I was. I had crossed the line. I had committed the ultimate betrayal. I didn't testify. I didn't speak. I didn't offer any explanation. I just sat there in silence, watching the world unfold around me, my fate being decided by other people. I had given up the fight. I had given up on life. I had given up on myself. The verdict came after what felt like an eternity. Guilty, the word echoed in the courtroom, hitting me like a physical blow. Guilty, my body trembled, my head swam, and for a moment, I thought that I was going to pass out, but I did not. I just sat there, still and silent, accepting my fate. I had finally reaped what I had sown. And now, it was time for me to face the music. I was going to pay the price for my desire. I was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. And as they were leading me away, as I was being dragged out of the courtroom, I looked over at Emily, who was sitting in the back, her eyes wet with tears, her body trembling. She had never given up on me. She had always been there for me, even after everything that had happened. She looked at me, her eyes full of sadness, and also something else, something that I could not quite make out. It was not hate. That much was clear. But it was also not love. It was something else, something that I did not understand. I knew that I did not understand. Would never be able to see her again. I knew that I had destroyed her life too, and that I had taken away any chance for her to ever have a normal life. Again, my heart broke. Again, my heart broke. Again, my heart broke. Again, I was transferred to a maximum security prison, a cold, dark, and brutal place where the hope went to die. It was a world away from the life I had known, a world that was filled with violence, despair, and hopelessness. I spent my days in a tiny cell, surrounded by the screams of other inmates, by far the harsh echoes of steel, and the heavy presence of my own demons. I tried to read, to write, to escape into other worlds, but my mind was always pulled back to reality, to the truth of my situation. I was a killer, I was a monster, and I was a killer, I was a monster, trapped forever in this prison, and I had no one to blame but myself. In my darkest moments, when I felt like I could not take it anymore, when the pain became too much to bear, I would think of Emily, of her beauty, her grace, her kindness, and her gentle touch, and for a moment, I could feel a glimmer of hope. I knew that, even though I had destroyed everything, that even though I had crossed the line, that there was still some part of me that was good, and that there was still a possibility of redemption. But it was a long road, a road that I would have to walk alone, and I did not know if I was strong enough or brave enough to make it to the end. And at night, I would often find myself crying, lost in the memories of crying, lost in the memories of crying. What I had lost, of the person that I had destroyed, and of the life that I was never going to have. I was a prisoner of my own past, and now I had become a prisoner in my own right. As the years went by, I slowly started to adapt to my new life. I became a shadow in the prison, always trying to stay out of trouble, trying to fade into the background, trying to remain invisible. But my mind, my heart was always somewhere else, with Emily, and with the life that we could have had if only things had been different. I knew that it was foolish. I knew that it was a dangerous dream, but I could not stop myself. I also spent a lot of time writing, pouring my thoughts, my feelings, and my experiences onto page after page, using every moment that I could find, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, and to try to come to terms with the choices that I had made, and the person that I had become. I wrote about Emily, about my father, about Claire, about my father, about my mother, and about all the people who had touched my life. I wrote about my desire, my betrayal, my guilt, my anger, and my path to redemption. I wrote about the darkness that I had faced, and about the glimmer of hope that I still carried within, with hope that I still carried within me. And by doing that, I slowly started to heal. I started to forgive myself, and I started to find a way to finally accept what had happened and to move on. The sterile, echoing silence of the prison cell became my constant companion. Time, in its cruelest form, seemed to stretch and warp, each day a carbon copy of the last, yet each moment also a stark reminder of the choices that had led me here. The outside world, with its sunshine, its laughter, its freedom, became nothing more than a distant memory, a hazy dream from a life that now felt so incredibly far away. I was trapped, not just physically, but also mentally, a prisoner of my own making, haunted by the ghosts of my past and the weight of my present, and the weight of my present, uncertainty of my future. I continued to write every single day, using the meager supplies they would give me, pouring my thoughts, my memories, and my feelings onto countless pages, filling notebooks with a chaotic collection of words, seeking a way to understand, to process, to cope, to simply make sense of it all, I wrote about my childhood, about my mother, about my father, about Emily, about Claire, about my friends, my family, and about all the people who had touched my life. Better or for worse, about all the mistakes that I had made and all the things that I had lost. It was through the act of writing that I finally began to face my demon, to confront the ugliness that I had carried within me, and to start the long and painful process of healing. I relived the moments that had defined me, the moments that had brought me to this place. I explored my past and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. I wrote about that night, the night when I had that night seen Emily after the rain, the night when my life had changed forever. I wrote about the way she had looked, so wet, so vulnerable, yet so powerful, her clothes clinging to her body, highlighting all the curves and lines that had captivated me. Wrote about the way she had touched me, the gentle brush of her hand against my skin, that spark that had ignited a fire within me. I wrote about that look in her eyes, a mixture of fear and understanding, as she knew that I was crossing a line, that I was falling, and that she was not going to stop me. It was a moment of truth, a moment of recognition. And I had embraced it completely, and I had never been able to get it out of my head. I wrote about the letters that I had found in my head, Father's room, the letters that revealed the hidden truth. That Emily was never what I had thought, that my parents' marriage was a lie, and that we were all just players in some twisted game. And I wondered if they were both just as miserable as me, as if all the happiness that they had shown to the world was just a sham. I wrote about my anger, my hatred, my jealousy, my despair, and my utter and complete desire for revenge. I also wrote about Claire, my ex-girlfriend, and about how her youth and inexperience had always left me feeling unsatisfied, and about how I was unfair to her. I had used her as an escape, as a way to pretend that I was fine, as a way to forget all the forbidden desires that had started to control my mind. I finally realized that I had never loved her, and that she was never the one that I had wanted, and my guilt was only intensified by that realization. I had hurt her, and now I was not even able to feel any remorse. I was just a broken man, unable to love or care, my heart a cold and empty place. I wrote about all the times that I had hurt Emily, about all the lies that I had told her, and about how I had destroyed her life. I wrote about my shame, about my regret, and about the overwhelming sense of responsibility for all the pain that I had caused, and the utter helplessness that I now had to live with. I replayed her face over and over in my mind, the way she had looked at me that day, her eyes wet with tears, her body shaking with pain, her heart completely broken. I wanted to ask her to forgive me, but I knew that I would never have that chance, that I had lost her forever, and I deserved that pain, and I was going to carry it with me until the day that I would I would then focus on the present and on the future that I was facing. My words became a way for me to escape the confines of my cell and to finally explore the darkest corners of my mind, to understand who I was and what I had become. I was slowly coming to terms with the reality of my situation. I was a murderer, and I was going to pay the price for my actions. I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison, trapped by my own desires, my own actions, and my own mistakes. But I was also going to write. I had to. In between my writing, I would exercise. I do whatever I could to keep my body strong, to not give up completely, to keep myself sane, to not let the darkness consume me completely. I would walk around the small cell, push myself to my limits, and push myself harder than I had ever before. I had to maintain some sort of control over my body, to show that I was not going to let it all go, that I would not surrender, that I was going to continue to fight even when all hope was gone. I also spent a lot of time thinking about Emily, wondering what she was doing, how she was coping, and if she had finally managed to move on from the pain that I had caused. I had heard nothing from her since my trial, and I did not know if she was even still alive. But I hoped that she was, and I prayed that she was happy. She deserved that. She deserved to live a life that was free from all the pain that I had inflicted upon her, and I had inflicted upon her. I hoped that one day she would be able to forgive me. I knew that it was a selfish desire, but I also knew that I could not stop myself from hoping. One day, a letter arrived, sent to me by my public defender, the woman who had tried so hard to help me. And even though I had refused to listen to her, I was always grateful for the effort. I opened it with trembling hands, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a letter from Emily, and for a moment, I did not know what to do. I wanted to read it. I wanted to know what she had to say, but I was also afraid of what I might find, of the truth that she had decided to write to me. I finally opened the letter and started to read her words, so familiar, so gentle, so full of sadness and pain, yet also so full of strength and grace. Jake, she wrote, I don't know if you're ever going to read this, but I need to say it, all of it, even if it's just for me. I don't hate you. I can't hate you. I have loved you. I have loved you, wanted you, and I have always been drawn to your soul, to the good parts of you that I know are still there, buried under the darkness. I also know that you were not always a monster. There was a time when you were kind, gentle, and full of hope, and I will always remember that. I know that I did not do the right thing. I should have stopped you. I should have tried to protect you. I should have walked away, and I should have told you the truth. But I didn't, and because of that, we didn't, and because of that, both ended up here. I made my choices, and I have to live with the consequences. You did too, and I'm not going to judge you for that. I can't. It's not my place to judge anyone. We were both just trying to find our way in the darkness, and we both ended up getting lost and making mistakes along the way. I know that you're in pain. I can feel it. I can see it in your eyes. I can feel it in my heart, and I wish that things had been different. You deserve so much better than this, and so did your father, and so did I, but it seems that fate had other plans. I hope that you're doing okay. You must be so tired. Please, do not give up. I know that you have been through so much, that you've lost so much, You must feel so alone, so broken. But I also know that you are strong, that you are resilient, and that you are capable of overcoming anything. You just have to believe in yourself and to keep fighting for the light that you know resides within you. You have so much potential. You have such a kind heart. Please, do not waste your life. Do not let the darkness consume you. You have to find a way to forgive yourself, and you have to find a way to move on, because that's what I'm doing, and you need to do it too. I'm leaving Jake, I'm leaving this state, and I'm starting over. I'm finally going to do everything that I have always wanted, for me, and for my own sake. I will always remember you, Jake. I will always remember you, Jake. I will always remember you, Jake. Always remember that connection that we had. I will never forget the time that we spent together and the moments that we shared. And I will always hope that one day we will both find some peace and that we will both finally be free. Take care of yourself and never give up hope. The letter ended there. I read it again and again, my eyes wet with tears, my heart aching with a strange mixture of pain and gratitude. Emily had forgiven me, and in her forgiveness, I felt a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark of light in the darkness that had been my constant companion. She had released me from the prison of my guilt and my shame, and for the first time in a long time, I could finally see a path towards a future. I was not going to let her down. I was going to honor her forgiveness. I was going to find a way to move on, to heal, and to finally be free. I had to start by forgiving myself. That was my new goal. I had to forgive the boy that I was, and I had to accept the man that I had become. I had to make peace with my past, and I had to embrace the possibilities of my future. and I had to find a way to use my voice to make a difference in the world. I had to write, I had to write, I had to show thy story. I had to show the world that I was not a monster and that I was worthy of redemption. I had made mistakes, but I was not defined by my mistakes. I had survived, and I was now ready to live. I continued to write. For years, I poured my heart and my soul into every page, my voice growing stronger, more confident, and more authentic. With every word, I wrote about my pain, my loss, my guilt, my shame, and also about my desires, my hopes, and my dreams. I wrote about the people that I had loved and the people that I had lost, and I wrote about the lessons that I had learned, and slowly, I started to believe that I was worthy of forgiveness and that it was possible to find a new beginning, that I could finally start to heal. The prison library became my sanctuary, a small, quiet room filled with the wisdom and the stories of generations past. It was here that I found solace, a space where I could escape the harsh realities of my confinement, where I could lose myself in the pages of my confinement, countless books, and where I could finally connect with my own voice. I read everything I could get my hands on: classics, novels, poetry, history, philosophy, and psychology. Trying to understand the human condition, trying to find some meaning, some purpose in my own suffering and my own experiences. I was searching for truth. I was searching for answers. I was searching for myself. My writing evolved. Share my story with the world, to connect with other people, to make a difference. I no longer wanted to wallow in self-pity or be defined by my mistakes, by my past, by my pain. I wanted to move forward, and I wanted to help other people who were struggling with similar demons. I wanted to show them that it was possible to heal, that it was possible to find forgiveness, and that it was possible to create a new life. No matter how bleak the past might seem, no matter how hopeless the future might seem, I wrote about my life, my family, about Mike, about Claire, about Emily, about Jamie, about all the people who had shaped me and changed me. I wrote about my desire, my betrayal, my shame, my anger, my regret, and my path to self-acceptance. I poured every single piece of myself into my writing, without holding anything back, without any fear, without any lies. I wrote about my darkness and also about the hope that still flickered within me. I wrote about my dreams, my fears, my ambitions, and my journey to discover who I was, what I truly wanted, and what my place in the world was meant to be. My writing became a way to connect with my past and to make peace with it. I realized that my parents had been flawed, that they had made mistakes, and that they had both been trying to find happiness in a world that was filled with so much pain and suffering. They were just human, after all. They were doing the best that they could with the limited tools that they had. And now, I was forced to see them as they truly were, not just as the figures that had shaped my childhood. I also realized that I had to let go of my anger, that I had to forgive them, that I had to accept their faults and to see the good in them in order to be able to move on. And that was the hardest thing that I had ever done. I had to reconcile my love for them with all the things they had done wrong, the lives that they had ruined, and that was a never-ending task. I also wrote about Emily, the woman who had changed my life, the woman who had become my greatest sin and also my greatest inspiration. I wrote about her beauty, her grace, her kindness, her strength, and her unwavering spirit, but I also explored her darkness, the pain that she had carried with her, the secrets that she had been hiding, and the decisions that had led her down a similar path. I wanted to understand her. I wanted to see her as she truly was, to honor the person that she had been, and also to acknowledge the person that I had seen her become. I wrote about my love for her and the undeniable connection that we had shared. But I also wrote about the guilt that I felt, for the pain that I had caused her, and for all of the lives that I had destroyed. I needed to make sure that I did not let that define me. I was more than that. And then I started to share my work. I submitted my writing to various literary magazines, and to my surprise, some of them accepted it. They published my stories, my poems, and my essays. And suddenly, I had an audience. Other people were reading my words. They were connecting with my experiences, and they were sending me letters telling me how my story had touched them, how it had helped them, how it had given them hope. My words were finally having an effect on others. I had finally found a way to make my voice heard, to make a difference in the world. And that made me feel alive. That made me feel alive, feel worthy. And that made me feel like I had finally found my purpose. I was not just a prisoner anymore. I was also a writer, a storyteller, and a beacon of hope. It was through my writing that I also found a way to reach out to others in a prison. I started a writing group where I encouraged other inmates to share their stories, their feelings, and their experiences. And we met every week in the small prison library, surrounded by books and by words. I saw them all, their words, just like me, trapped by their past, but also searching for a way to make a change, to redeem themselves, to start again. I had become their leader, their guide, their beacon of hope, and they were helping me just as much as I was helping them. I could finally see that I was not alone, and it was a powerful thing to realize. It was also then that I knew that I could not let my past define me. Years turned into decades. I continued to write, and I continued to heal. I was no longer focused on escaping my past, but I was now focused on building a future for myself and for the other people who had found themselves lost in the darkness. I was creating, I was inspiring, and I was helping other people. I was doing everything that I could to atone for my sins and to make something good out of the mistakes that I had made, to honor the memory of my mother, of my father, and of all the people who had been hurt by my actions, including Emily. She had been my greatest teacher, and she had given me the strength to fight. One day, a letter arrived, sent to me by my public defender, the woman who had always believed in me, even when I had refused to believe in myself. And I had a strange feeling that something was about to change, that my life was about to take another turn. I opened the letter, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands trembling with anticipation. There was a single sheet of paper inside with a handwritten note on it, her beautiful script, still so familiar. Jake, it read, "It's been a long time. I know that you've been writing and that you're helping other people. I'm proud of you. I'm finally at peace, and I'm finally happy. I have done everything that I had always wanted to do. I have traveled, I have painted, I have danced, I have sung, and I have finally managed to let go of all of my regrets. I also want you to know that I have forgiven you. I forgave you a long time ago. You were just a young man lost in your own darkness, and I have always known that you were not a monster. I'm glad you are doing well, and that you have found a way to make your life meaningful. And you have to know that I'm going to be okay, that I finally found my own happiness, and that you have been a part of it. I hope that you are happy too. And you have to know that I have never forgotten about you, and that I have always hoped that one day you would finally find your way home. I'm sorry I could not do it for you, but I believe in you. I'm okay, and I hope that you're doing well too, wherever you are." There was no return address. I did not know where she was. I did not know if I was ever going to see her again, but her words had filled my heart with peace and with hope. They were the validation that I had been searching for all of these years, a sign that I was not beyond redemption, that I could finally let go of the past and embrace the future with the past. Open arms. I was not alone anymore. I was finally free, and I was finally on my own path, and it was leading me not towards destruction, but towards something more. Emily's letter became my most prized possession. a testament to her forgiveness, her love, and her unwavering belief in me. I carried it with me always, reading it whenever the darkness threatened to overwhelm me, finding solace in her words, and drawing strength from her wisdom. It was a reminder of everything I had lost, but also a beacon of hope, a symbol of the new life that I was building for myself, brick by brick, day by day. I had also realized, after reading the letter so many times, that I no longer wanted to search for her, that what we had shared was over, that it belonged to the past, and that what I had now was much more valuable. I had to live in the present. I had to move forward. My writing gained new meaning, new intensity, and also a new purpose. I started to focus on themes of redemption, forgiveness, and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most devastating of circumstances. I wanted to explore the gray areas of life, the complexities of human relationships, and the delicate balance between desire and destruction, and everything in between, in an attempt to understand the human condition, and also to understand myself. I became a storyteller, and I was now able to connect with people on a deeper level. I also started to connect with other prisoners. I felt like a bridge, a translator. I could understand where they came from, because we had both been there, in the darkness, lost and broken, and I was ready to lead them towards the light. My writing group grew as other inmates, drawn to my words, and also to the sense of understanding and acceptance that I offered, joined our little group. They shared their stories, their secrets, their shame, and their pain. And we listened, and we learned, and we grew together, all of us, bound by our shared experiences, and also by our hopes and dreams. We were all wounded souls, looking for some meaning, looking for some purpose, in a world that had tried to take everything away from us. And we were together, we're fighting. I had become a mentor and a guide, and I had found a new purpose in helping others. It was through helping them that I was finally able to help myself. It was through their stories that I was finally able to understand my own. And I was so grateful to be in a position where I could help someone, where I could share my experiences, and where I could make a difference. It was also through them that I had learned what true forgiveness was. It was not about letting the past go. It was about carrying the scars and moving forward, using the pain as a way to make yourself stronger, a way to make yourself better, and a way to create a more meaningful life. One day, a new prisoner arrived, a young man who had been convicted of drug trafficking. He was quiet, withdrawn, and filled with a deep, almost suffocating sense of shame and despair. He refused to talk to anyone, to share his story, or to even acknowledge the other people who had been trying to reach out to him. He was a man who was so lost in his own pain that he was unable to see the light that was still available to him. He reminded me of myself back then, when I was first put into prison. I knew I had to do something to help him. I knew I had to do something to help him. Could not just let him give up on himself. I approached him cautiously, offering him a book and a kind smile. He looked at me, his eyes full of suspicion and also a strange mixture of curiosity. He had seen me, I had seen him. We had both seen the darkness in ourselves. I invited him to join our writing group without expecting him to actually say yes, but to my surprise, he agreed. His name was Daniel, and it took him a long time to open up, to share his story, to trust us, but thus I was patient, I was persistent, and I was never going to give up on him. He was a talented writer with a way with words that was both raw and powerful. But he was also filled with a deep-seated sense of guilt and self-loathing, a belief that he was not worthy of love or forgiveness. I knew that feeling all too well as he started to share his experiences. I realized that he had come from a very different background, that he had been raised in poverty, in a world that was filled with violence and neglect, and that he had never had a chance, that he was just trying to survive in the only way that he knew how. I recognized the pain in his voice, the sorrow in his eyes, and the struggle that he had gone through. And I knew that he was not a bad person, that he was not a lost cause, and that he was capable of change. I told him my story. I shared with him my struggles, my failures, and my journey to self-acceptance. And I showed him that it was possible to overcome even the most difficult of circumstances, that it was possible to find a new path, and that it was possible to find some peace. I became his mentor, his guide, and his friend, just as Emily had been to me. And I finally understood her. I had finally understood her, become what she had always been, someone who could make a difference, someone who could provide hope and guidance to others. And then I started to get letters from my public defender, letters from editors, and then finally, a letter from editors. A stranger, a woman who had read my work and who had been touched by my story, and who had also seen a spark of something special in me. It was a letter that changed everything. Her name was Elizabeth, and she was a book editor in New York City, and she had read my stories, and she had been so moved by them that she wanted to meet me, that she wanted to publish my work, and that she wanted to help me share my story with the world. And for once, I felt something other than despair, or anger, or guilt. I felt a sense of excitement, of anticipation, and of hope. We started to correspond, sharing our thoughts, our feelings, and our ideas. And I started to envision a life beyond the walls of the prison, a life that was filled with a prison, a life that was filled with purpose, with meaning, and with the opportunity to make a real difference in the world. Years passed. My sentence was eventually commuted due to good behavior, my work with the writing group, and the support of so many people, including my lawyer, my fellow prisoners, and also Elizabeth. I was finally going to be free, at last. I was going to finally embrace the future, and I was finally going to start living my life. I said goodbye to my friends in prison and promised to never forget them or the lessons that I had learned from them. It was not the end, but it was just a new beginning, and I was ready. The day I walked out of the prison gates, I took a deep breath, the fresh air filling my lungs, washing over me, cleansing me, making me feel lighter than I had ever felt before. I looked up at the sky, and I could finally see the sun again, the warmth of it against my skin, melting away the coldness that had lingered for so long. I was free. Elizabeth was there to meet me, waiting for me with a warm smile, her eyes full of kindness and hope. She looked just like I had imagined, strong, confident, and intelligent, with a heart of gold. And we drove away together, heading towards a new future. A future that I was finally ready to embrace, without fear, without guilt, and without looking back. I was finally on my path, and I was ready to see where it would take me. We went to New York City, where I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood where I could finally write and be myself without any fear of judgment. And we started working together to get my story out into the world. Elizabeth became my editor, my mentor, and my friend. She helped me hone my craft. Challenged my beliefs, and she pushed me to be better than I ever thought I could be. And in her, I had found a kindred spirit, someone who understood me, who accepted me, flaws and all, and who was willing to help me become the man that I was meant to be. My book was eventually published, a story about desire, betrayal, forgiveness, redemption, and the power of the human spirit to overcome anything that life throws our way. It was called Forbidden Echoes, a title that reflected the echo of my past, the lessons that I had learned, and the love that I was finally able to feel. And it was a huge success. People from all over the world, from different walks of life, connected with my story, and they were finally able to see that they were not alone in their struggles, and that they were also capable of finding their own redemption. And I finally had found my voice, and I had finally found my peace. I had done it. I had finally made something meaningful out of my life. And as for Tony, well, he had been with me through it all, a constant source of strength, love, and support. He had moved to Oregon a few years before I had been released, and he had finally opened his bar, the Lighthouse, a place where people could come together and feel at home. He was there to celebrate with me. He was always there for me, and he had never given up hope that we could have a future together. He came to New York when my book was published, and we met for dinner in a small restaurant in the city. Surrounded by the bright lights of the city, we had not seen each other in several years, and I was nervous, anxious to see if he was still the same, to see if my feelings for him were still the same. If my feelings for him were still the same, had become a figure from the past, a distant memory that I always held dear, that I always wanted. As soon as he walked through the door, I felt that same warmth, that same comfort, that same recognition that I had always felt whenever I was near him. It was as if no time had passed. He was my best friend, he was my family, he was my safe place. And as he walked towards me, I smiled. I finally knew that I was home. He was home. He had also changed. He looked older, more mature, and there was a sense of peace and calm that surrounded him, like he had finally found his own happiness. And I knew that we had both finally managed to make it to the other side of our darkness. We hugged for a long time, just holding each other, feeling the connection that we had both shared, a connection that time and distance could not break. And then we sat down and started to talk. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about my book, about his bar, about all the things that had changed, and also about all the things that had stayed the same. We were two broken souls who had found each other, two lost travelers who had finally found their way home. And as I looked at him, sitting across the table from me, hissing across the table from me, eyes filled with love and laughter, his face relaxed and content, I knew that I was finally ready to move on, to close that chapter of my life, and to start a new one, with him by my side for the rest of our lives. I was not perfect. I was still a flawed man, but I was also stronger. I was wiser. I was kinder, and I was finally free. And I knew that I was never going to be alone again. The years that followed were a testament to the power of healing, the strength of the human spirit, and the enduring force of love. Tony and I became partners, not just in friendship, but in life. We understood each other, we supported each other, and we challenged each other to be better. We were like two halves of a whole, two lost souls who had finally found their way home. And we were building a new life, side by side, brick by brick, day by day. We decided that we were going to sell both our properties and then find a new place to live, a place where we could put down roots, a place where we could finally be together without the weight of the past holding us back. We found a small cabin in the mountains of Oregon, not far from the town where Tony had opened the Lighthouse, a cozy little space that was surrounded by tall trees, rushing streams, and a quiet sense of peace. It was a far cry from the busy streets of Tampa and from the crowded prisons where we had both lost our way, but it was perfect for us. And we both felt at peace in this new home, transformed the cabin into a space that reflected our shared experiences, that reminded us of where we had been, and that celebrated where we were going. I had a writing room filled with books and with the countless pages that chronicled my journey, and Tony had created a small workshop in the back where he would build furniture and work with his hands, always creating something new, always searching for something to create. We had also added a garden in the backyard full of herbs, flowers, and vegetables, a place where we would spend our days tending to our plants and tending to our souls. The Lighthouse became a local treasure, a place where the community would gather for good times and for bad, for laughter and tears, and Tony was the heart and soul of it. He would welcome everyone with a warm smile, a friendly joke, and a drink, and he always had a story to tell. and he was always ready to listen. He was exactly what that town needed, and he was the bestly what that town needed, and he was the best friend that I could ever ask for. I became a regular at the bar, sitting in a corner booth, scribbling on notebooks, writing my stories, while watching the people around me. I was always gathering inspiration. My book, Forbidden Echoes, had become a sensation. It had sold millions of copies, and it had touched the lives of countless people all over the world. I received letters from people who had been through similar experiences, who had been lost, broken, and defeated, but had found hope, healing, and redemption thanks to my story. And I knew that all the pain, all the struggles, all the heartaches had finally served a purpose. I was not just a writer, I was now an inspiration, a beacon of hope, and a reminder that it is always possible to start again, no matter how many mistakes you have made. And that was more than I had ever asked for. I started to travel, to share my story with the world, to speak at events, and to inspire people to face their fears, to embrace their vulnerabilities, and to connect with their inner selves. I talked about the power of love, the importance of forgiveness, the need for hope, and the strength of the human spirit. And every time that I did, I felt like I was healing a little bit more, that I was becoming more whole, that I was finally finding a way to let go of my past. I was also helping other people, and that had become my new purpose. I used my platform to support organizations that help people who were struggling with addiction, with trauma, and with the challenges of re-entry into society after prison. I became a voice for those who had been silenced, and I used my story to shine a light on the darkness that so many people had to live with. I was no longer ashamed of what I had done. I was not going to let that define me. I was finally ready to embrace my past and to use it to make a difference in the world. In the years that followed, Tony and I built a life that was full of laughter, love, and meaning. We adopted a rescue doll, a big, goofy mutt that we named Hope, a reminder that even when things were dark, that there was always a reason to keep going, that there was always a light at the end of the tunnel. We had long walks in the forest and spent countless hours on the beach watching the sunsets together. And every single day, I felt a deeper connection to the man who had saved my life. I had never been happier. I had finally found love, and I had finally found my home. We also made a trip back to my hometown for a visit. We had to face my past to make my peace with what had been and what was. I wanted to see my mother, to tell her about my life, and to see how she was doing. Tonio knew that this was a necessary part of my journey, and he came with me, offering his support and his strength like he always did. I was nervous about the reaction that I would get. I knew that some people would still judge me, that they would still see me as the monster that I had once been. But I also knew that I had to go back, that I could not run away from my past, that I had to face it head on in order to finally be free. When we arrived at my mother's house, the place that I had tried to run away from for so long, I was met by a group of people, all of them smiling, as if they were welcoming back their prodigal son, ready to embrace me with open arms. It was a mix of familiar faces and also some new ones. Some of my old neighbors, my cousins, my aunts, and also some of the people that I had grown up with. And they all treated me with kindness and respect and love, a feeling that was completely overwhelming. I could see the love in their eyes, and to see the love in their eyes. They looked at me not as a monster, but as a survivor, as a man who had made mistakes, but who had learned from them and who had finally found his way home. It was as if they had all been waiting for me, that they had always known that I was going to come back. My mother greeted me at the door, her eyes filled with tears, her body shaking with emotion. She pulled me into a hug, holding me tight. As I sobbed, "My son," she whispered, "you're home." and in that hug, I knew that I was finally free. I had been looking for love, for acceptance, for understanding, but it had always been right there. In front of me, I had been so busy chasing after something that was not real, that I had forgotten that the greatest treasures in life were always the ones closest to home. I was finally home. We spent a few weeks there, reconnecting with my family and with all the people who had shaped my childhood. And it felt like I had finally come full circle. Found my place in the world. I was home, and I was at peace, at last. I knew that I was not going to stay there, that I had a life to live, that I had a story to tell, and a new path to follow. But I knew that I would always have a place to come back to, a place where I would always be loved and accepted for who I was and not for what I had done. And then, as I was getting ready to leave, to return to Oregon, to my new life, to my new home, my gaze drifted to an old photo album filled with faded pictures from my childhood. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and started to flip through the pages, seeing the faces of all the people who had touched my life. And there I saw a picture of a woman I had not seen in a very long time, my stepmother, Emily. I paused, my heart aching, as I remembered her kindness, her grace, her strength, and her love. It was then that I realized that I was never going to fully move on until I had a chance to speak to her. One last time, I closed the book and made a promise to myself that I would find her and I would thank her for everything, for giving me hope, for saving my life. As we drove back home, I told Tony about my feelings, and he understood, always did. He knew that it was something that I had to do. I had to lay those ghosts to rest, and I had to say goodbye to the person that I had been, and to the woman that I had loved, and to the man that I had destroyed. I was ready to face everything. I was ready to move on, and I was ready to finally embrace my future with open arms and with an open heart. The need to find Emily became an all-consuming fire within me, a burning desire that eclipsed all else. I had to thank her, I had to apologize, and I had to see her just one last time before I could finally let go of the past and fully embrace my future. I knew that it was a long shot, that she could be anywhere in the world, but I also knew that I could not rest until I had found her. This was a final step in my healing journey. I had to see her face, I had to hear her voice, and I had to know that she was finally free. I started by reaching out to my old public defender, the woman who had always believed in me, the one who had helped me through the darkest days of my life, who was now also a good friend. She was surprised to hear from me, but she was also supportive, and she promised that she would do everything she could to help me. And I knew that if anyone could find her, it was her. I also used my contacts in the publishing world and contacted various magazines and organizations, hoping that someone might have heard of her, that someone might have some information about her whereabouts. I sent out inquiries, I placed ads online, and I used social media, all the while sharing my story, sharing my truth, and sharing my desire to find the woman who had saved my life. I was finally putting all of my efforts into finding her. I needed to know that she was okay. Weeks turned into months, and I started to lose hope, but Tony never let me give up. He always told me that I would find her, that she was always there, that all that I needed was to keep searching, and to never lose sight of my purpose. He was the one who always kept me going, the one who kept me grounded, the one who was always there to remind me of what was truly important, and the one that always pulled me out of the darkness. He had become my rock. He was also my confidant. I was so lucky to have him in my life. And then, one rainy afternoon, while I was working at the bookstore, I received an email, an email that changed everything. It was from a woman who had read my book, who had been touched by my story, and who said that she might have some information about Emily. She said that Emily had been living in a small village in Italy, a place that was far away from everything that she had known before. A place that was known for its beauty, its peace, and its healing powers. She had found Emily while on vacation, and had also been moved by her story. After reading my book, my heart pounded, my hands trembled as I read the words on the screen. A mixture of fear and excitement washing over me. It was like a sign, like fate finally showing me the way. I knew that I had to go, that I had to see her, that I had to find a way to let go. I immediately booked a flight to Italy. I had to see her, power to find her, and thank her, and apologize for everything that I had done. It was a journey that I had to take, a pilgrimage that was necessary for my soul, and I was ready to finally complete it. The journey was long and arduous, but I did not care. My mind was focused on Emily, on her face, her eyes, her voice, and on all of the things that I had never had a chance to say to her. I arrived in Italy and started the long and arduous journey towards that small village, a tiny speck on the map. I traveled by trains, by buses, by taxis, and then finally I had to walk up the mountains, along winding roads, until I finally reached my destination. The village was small, quaint, with stone buildings, cobbled streets, and the smell of fresh flowers in the air, a place that was so different from anything I had ever known before, and it seemed that it had been taken straight out of a postcard. I asked for directions to Emily's house, and I found it on a quiet little street, away from the main part of the village. I approached the house slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door, my hands trembling, my body shaking as I waited for her to answer. It felt like a lifetime before I heard the sound of footsteps coming towards the door. And then, finally, the handle turned and Emily stood before me. A picture of quiet beauty, a vision of strength, and also a woman that I could finally let go of. Her face had a few more lines on it, and there was a hint of silver in her hair, but her eyes were still so kind, so gentle, so full of love, and they were fixed on me. It was as if she had been waiting for me, as if she had always known that I would find her one day. She had aged, but the beauty that had always drawn me in was still there, even after all of these years. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and it was like my heart stopped beating. It had been so long. I had dreamed of this moment, and now that it was finally happening, I was speechless. It was as if everything around me had faded away, and that all that existed in the world was just Emily and me, standing there, facing the truth of what had been, and what could never be. I nodded, unable to speak, unable to form any coherent words, my body trembling with a mixture of emotions that were overwhelming. She then opened the door wider and invited me in, and I walked inside, into the quiet sanctuary that she had created for herself. The house was small but cozy, filled with books, paintings, and other artifacts that reflected her love for art and knowledge. It was a space that was completely hers, and I was honored to be there, to share this space with her. "I've been expecting you," she said, her voice so warm, so gentle, as she led me to a small table near the window, where the sunlight was shining through, making everything glow. She sat down and gestured for me to do the same, her hand trembling ever so slightly. We spent the next few days together, talking and sharing, and finally, just being. We spoke about everything and nothing. We talked about my journey, my writing, my life in prison, my plans for the future. We talked about her life, about her new home, about the peace that she had finally found, and the art that she had been creating, the beautiful paintings that she had started to paint in her new studio. We also talked about the future, past, about our mistakes, about the pain that we had caused, and about the love that had both destroyed us and saved us. She finally told me, in that quiet little room, that she had finally forgiven me, that she had finally understood why I had done what I had done, and she told me that she did not blame me for all of our suffering and for all of our pain. And she also told me that she was finally happy, that she had finally moved on. And she said that she was content, and it was in that moment that I finally let it all go. I had done everything that I could. I had said everything that I needed to say, and I'd finally found the closure that I had been searching for so long. I was finally ready to move on. I also apologized for everything, for the pain that I had caused her, for all the lies, for all the betrayals, for everything. My voice full of remorse, and my body trembling with shame. She placed her hand on top of mine, her touch so gentle, so forgiving, and she looked into my eyes and said, "It's okay, Jake, I forgive you. You were just a young man, lost in the darkness, and I understand that now. You were just doing the best that you could, and I'm okay, Jake. I'm finally okay." I knew that she meant it. I knew that she had truly forgiven me, and that she had truly found her peace. She had taught me how to forgive myself, how to make peace with my past, and how to finally start to live my life without the weight of my life, without the weight of the past holding me down. On my final day, before I left, Emily and I walked through her small garden, surrounded by the beauty and the peace of the Italian countryside. We walked in silence, just enjoying the moment, until we reached a small bench near the edge of the garden, overlooking the village, the valley, and the endless hills, where we sat side by side, just holding hands and feeling the warm sun on our skin. We did not need to say anything. All that we had was enough, and I knew that we were both at peace, and that we had both finally found a way to move on. She looked at me and smiled, and then she said, "You know, Jake, I've always known that you were destined for something great. I can't wait to see what you do next." I smiled, for the first time in so long, a true and heartfelt smile that came from my soul and from the deep well of gratitude that had finally started to fill my heart. "Thank you, Emily," I said, my voice filled with emotion and with love. "Thank you for everything." She knew that it was more than just a thank you, that it was a confession, a farewell, and a final acknowledgement of the connection that we had always shared. She smiled back, her eyes full of love and hope, and squeezed my hand. And then finally, we let each other go. I walked away, my heart full of gratitude, and also a touch of sadness, knowing that I had finally found the peace that I had been looking for, and also that I was leaving behind someone who had been so important to me. But it was time to move on. It was time to embrace the future, and it was time to create a new life for myself. As I walked down the hill towards the train station, I looked back one last time at the small house, at the woman who had changed my life, and I smiled, and I knew that I was finally free. The train journey back to the States was a time for quiet reflection. The Italian countryside blurred past my window, each vista a brushstroke, a fresh, vibrant color that seemed to mirror the kaleidoscope of emotions within me. I was leaving behind the ghosts of my past, the remnants of my mistakes, and the echoes of my desire. But I was also carrying with me a newfound sense of peace, a deeper understanding of myself, and a renewed sense of purpose. I had finally confronted my demons, and I had finally found a way to move on. I returned to Oregon, to the lighthouse, to Tony, and to the life that I had built for myself with renewed energy and determination. I was no longer the broken and lost young man who had left Tampa, but a man who had been through the fire and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. I was ready to share my story, to use my experiences to help others and to create something meaningful and lasting with the rest of my life. My book continued to gain popularity, and with each passing day, more and more people were drawn to my words, finding comfort, solace, and inspiration in my story. I received countless letters, emails, and messages from people from all walks of life who had been touched by my story. Some were lost, some were broken, and some were searching for hope, but all of them had somehow found a connection to the darkness and to the light that was within me, in a way that felt both humbling and also empowering. It was like I was no longer alone, that we were all a part of something bigger, a community of souls who had all been through the storm and who were all desperately trying to find our way to the other side. I used my platform to advocate for prison reform, for mental health awareness, and for support systems for those who were struggling with addiction and with trauma. I spoke at conferences, at schools, and at prisons, sharing my story with anyone who would listen, and always encouraging them to find their own voice, to embrace their vulnerabilities, and to never give up on the power of the human spirit. I wanted to do everything that I could to make the world a better place, to create some good from the darkness, and to honor all of the people who had helped me get to where I was today. I had a platform, and I was going to use it to help others, to show them, that they were not alone, and that they were also worthy of love, of compassion, and of forgiveness. Tony and I also continued to build our life together, creating a place of solace and a sense of belonging in our little mountain town. The sense of belonging in our little mountain town lighthouse had become a fixture in the community, a place where people could come to connect, to share stories, and to find a sense of comfort and understanding. Tony's natural warmth, his infectious laughter, and his kind and generous heart were always a beacon of light, and I could see in his face that he had also found his calling, and he had finally found his own peace. He had also started to paint. He had taken up art as another way of expressing himself. His paintings, filled with color, energy, and emotion, quickly gaining a following in the local art scene. He was a natural artist, just as I was a natural writer, and I was always so happy to see him find his purpose, and I was always so happy to be in his presence. Every single day, we would spend hours together in the bar, in our home, walking through the mountains, and by the sea, and we would always talk about everything and nothing, our conversations flowing from the mundane details of our everyday life to the deepest parts of our souls. And we continued to grow together in our love for each other, and also for ourselves, and also for life. I had finally learned how to trust, and how to allow myself to be loved, and that, more than myself, to be loved. Anything had become my greatest achievement. And as for Emily, I never saw her again. I honored her request, and I let her live her life on her own terms. But I did not forget her. I never forgot the lessons that she had taught me. I never forgot the connection that we had shared, and I never forgot the love that I had felt for her. A love that had been both dangerous and healing. A love that had nearly destroyed me, but had also saved my life. She became a part of my story, a part of my soul, a reminder of the past, a source of inspiration, and also a distant memory of the woman that I had always loved, but that I could never have. I continued to write, to share my stories, to inspire others, and to make a difference in the world. My words reached countless people, and I received hundreds of letters and emails and messages from all corners of the earth. They were all so thankful that I was helping people. My life was now a living proof that it was possible to turn your pain into power, your failures into successes, your sins into redemption, and that anyone could have a second chance, that anyone could find their purpose, and anyone could be free. And with all of the success that I had, I was always grateful. I knew that it was all because of her, Emily, the woman who had saved my life and who had made me become the man that I was always meant to be. And in that recognition, I found a deep and lasting sense of peace. I was at peace with my past, I was at peace with my present, and I was ready for whatever my future might hold. Years turned into decades, my hair had started to turn gray, my face had become more lined, and my body felt a little more worn. But my body felt a little more worn. Heart was full, my mind was at peace, and my soul was finally free. I had finally embraced my past, I had finally made peace with my demons, and I had finally found my place in the world. I was now a storyteller, a survivor, a mentor, a friend, and also a man who had learned how to love and how to forgive. And that was enough. It was more than enough. Tony and I continued to grow together in our love and also in our purpose. We had finally created a life that was filled with lives, meaning, with joy, and with a deep sense of contentment. We had found a way to heal, to forgive, to move on, and to honor our past by creating a future that was filled with compassion, with kindness, and with love. We had become each other's family, and we had created a family of our own within the community that had become our home. And that, more than anything, had made us happy. We had both been lost, we had both been broken, and we had both found a way to be whole again. We had both found our way home. One evening, as we were sitting together on the porch of our mountain home, watching the sunset, painting the sky with vibrant hues of orange, pink, and gold, I looked over at Tony and smiled. He was everything that I had ever wanted and everything that I had ever needed. He was my confidant, my lover, my partner, my friend, and he was my soulmate. He knew me better than anyone else in the world. He loved me for who I was, for all of my flaws and imperfections, and he had always been there for me through thick and thin, always ready to offer a kind word, a warm hug, or a silent space. I felt so grateful for his presence in my life and for all that we had built together. And it was then that I finally knew that I had found my happy ending. I took a deep breath, and as I looked out at the beautiful sunset, I whispered, "Thank you, Tony." He looked at me, his eyes full of love, and he smiled. "For what?" he asked, his voice soft, his touch so gentle. I smiled back. "For everything, Tony, for everything." And in that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the world and by the love that filled my heart, I knew that I had finally made it, that I was finally free, that I was finally whole, and that I was finally at peace.